Welcome to the City Rooster Forum. I'm Ken Kasner. Always remembering that politics is just a noun variation of the word policy. So today's key phrase is based on the magic of how people can always deceive the government with these disguised charities and fundraisers. Using King's Day, no King's Day, as an example that happened recently, this past Saturday. There was a situation with no King's Day. Everybody talks about the many NGOs and other sources and the George Soros sources, many people, and the Chinese government, the CCP, that fund a lot of these radical groups. But there's also many other sources and local sources too that people are not talking about. We have local sources that have people doing all these terrible things to raise money, including using deception. Now, I've always said that people should never give money away to strangers and stories and things that people don't know. People are going to run a whole thing of propaganda. They're going to run a whole thing of printed literature, making it look credible. But it's all phony. It's phony. You never give money away on the street, just like you would not eat off the street. You would not go to a hot dog stand because it's disgusting. You wouldn't eat off the street. And there's a lot of phony charities. So when it comes to panhandling, it's more than just people asking for money for a cup of coffee or a sandwich when they're going to actually use it to either buy a gun or get drugs or alcohol. People are raising money for some of the craziest reasons. Some of them are like events like No King's Day, because they're organized events. We know that. They're not organic. They have to be paid for. And they're not just being paid for by NGOs or adversarial countries or George Soros. They're not just being paid. There's a lot of money coming from there, yes, but we also have to think about some of our domestic sources. People are funding these things from within because people are foolish enough to give money away to strangers who just approach them and say, we're raising money for children, or we're raising money for these good causes. But they're not doing that. They're not doing that at all. They're actually raising money for all these radical, progressive, liberal causes. And you don't know who you're giving your money away to, so why give your money away? You tell your children, don't talk to strangers. You don't eat food off the street because you don't know how sick you can get from it. So why give money away to strangers that are peddling off the street? And I have this happen to me lots of times. I ask lots of questions. I say, what is this money for? I say, who is your supervisor? I say, how come this is not in large print? How come this is not made so that people can look it up? Oh, yeah, sure. They give you a phony website. And then that website gets taken down maybe in a matter of 4 or 5 months so that the government can't trace them. Sure. They do that all the time. And people give money. I see it all the time. I was at a train platform. I was waiting for a train. I was on the train platform, and there was this one guy who was actually asking me for money for a certain cause so they can do some sort of construction to alleviate homelessness in my state. So this time I asked him something interesting. I said, who's your source for all this? Where does all this money go to? See, people don't ask that. They just take some money out. Oh, here, I'd be happy to help. And they just give all this money here. Yeah, that really works well for them. Okay, and they feel good. And then people wonder who's funding all these progressive liberal causes. Well, he did something interesting. He was going my way and he was getting off at my town. So I went with him to what's called a liberation center. A liberation center is a phony church. They're phony churches, and they basically try to get you to follow their God. You know, I thought it was proselytizing at first, but it turns out it wasn't a real church. It was just a center where they were trying to deceive people into believing a certain element and then saying, we need money for this church. One of the big disputes about Christianity is that now there's a lot of people disguising themselves as churches for bad causes, and they're not real churches. So people get involved, people sit there. There was a liberation center not very far from me, just like maybe 5 or 6 blocks. So I sat there and I listened. Now, of course, they said to me, you must be Christian. You must have been Christian all your life. I said, well, I'm just here to observe. I'm not going to say much. I found that when you go to places to observe, don't say much, because that's the game they play. You listen to what they're saying and you find out if they're real or not. So there was a woman at the top of the stage that said, welcome to our church. Welcome to so-and-so. Welcome to the building of God. And she went on, and I was listening to this. And I didn't go to sleep, as boring as it was and as tempted as I was to go to sleep, because I was learning things. It was very educational. And what happened is that a lot of times people don't think about what they're getting themselves into. Now, I knew deep down inside I wasn't going to give any money. And I wasn't going to tell them too much about myself. I just simply said, I'm here as an observer. I want to learn about this. Now, learning about it is what I did. Well, it started out with God and prayer and all these wonderful things and the Bible. And then in a matter of 15 or 20 minutes or so, the subject changed. There wasn't as much God involved in it. There wasn't as much prayer involved in it. She said, one of the things we need to do to save our country is to get rid of the kings. We need to get rid of Donald Trump. We need to get rid of the government. We need to get rid of what they call capitalism. They said all these horrible things. Now, a couple of men went up there. They were well dressed. And they were talking about all these people and telling them that they were doing all these horrible things. Now, I knew in my mind that it was propaganda because I heard all this talk before. I heard all this talk about who was an illegal alien, where stolen land was. They said all that terrible, terrible stuff. It was horrible. And after being there for about an hour, I said, okay, I'm hungry. I really need to go. And they said, we really appreciate your attendance. We need to get more information about you because you've been listening to us for an hour. We need to find out more about you. So they started asking me some interesting questions. What money do you make? Where is your local police department? And what kind of relationship do you have with them? That was a strange question because they're in the town. They started out as a godly church, and now they're asking me, where is your local police department? Why would they ask a question like that? Well, I started to see the inconsistency of all this. And I said, I like to do things slowly. I'll find out more as I go along. I don't live very far from here, but I'm not going to put down any personal information for me at this time. So one guy got up, hearing me say this to the people on the stage when they asked me, and he said, I think that guy is a Trump supporter. I think he is trying to get Donald Trump to become a king. I think he's part of the movement. And another person said, I think that guy is a cop. You know how white men are. White men are the sneakiest cops. That's what they said. And I said, no, you're wrong. I'm not a cop. I'm not being sneaky. I'm just being inquisitive. They said, sir, why are you here? I said, one of your people that was raising money at the train station helped me find this place. I didn't even know there was a liberation center. I didn't know what a liberation center was. I didn't even know there was one down the street from me, and I've been living where I've been for over 2 decades. And then one guy said, that guy is definitely a cop. We have to get him out of here. And one person said, sir, let me have your gun. I said, I don't have a gun. Why would you be asking me for my gun when I don't have one? They said, sir, what is that pouch on the side? I said, it's my cell phone. See, I carry my cell phone in a pouch on the side of my pants. They said, why is it thicker than your cell phone? I said, because I bring my charger along too. So in that way, I was very transparent with them. I said, then why don't you want to give personal information? Are you working undercover with something? And I said, no, I'm not doing that at all. And they were talking all sorts of things and accusing me of being all sorts of things I wasn't. And they said, maybe you work for the KKK. I said, no, I don't work for the KKK. I said, can we check your ID? I said, first you accused me of being a cop. Then you're asking me for ID. I didn't identify myself as a cop. So why are you looking for trouble? So then a couple of the women that were on stage waved their arms like this, and a couple of the large men wanted to grab me. And they said, we're going to get you out of here. I said, you don't need to get me out of here. I'll go. I can see that I'm not wanted here anymore. But they grabbed me by the shoulders, and they picked me up, and they threw me out the door onto the street. So I have a few scrapes. Okay, they're not really that bad. One person tried to go after me with a baseball bat, but I ran away. So everything you've heard about people saying stuff that they don't know and making guesswork about things and not even looking things up and talking about things with people that they see that they really don't see, but they just make up in their minds, it's true. I physically saw it there. It wasn't a video. It wasn't something on YouTube or Rumble. It wasn't a podcast. I actually experienced this for myself. And I didn't even ask him for anything. I didn't ask any questions. I just sat there, kept my mouth shut, which is something that if you watch my podcast, you might think, oh, that guy never shuts up. But this was one time I kept quiet. And when I keep quiet, I'm learning about something that other people say. So there's one of these liberation centers down the street from me. Now, these liberation centers, after I got out of there, I went and got something to eat. talked about it with people in the restaurant. One guy actually said, yeah, I was there too. They treated me the same way. Well, later on, I came home that night after I ate to look up these liberation centers that are supposedly all over the country. Now, these liberation centers aren't real churches, but they're disguising themselves as churches, and they're making themselves look real authentic, even though they're not. But if you listen really carefully, you can tell that there's a lot of inconsistency to what they talk about and what they're trying to get people to think and feel. Now, I've been in real churches with other people. Not that I was going to be a Christian, but they stay on the same subject. So, people who run real churches and people that run real synagogues stay on the same thing. So you can tell when you listen to people, if they start to change what they're talking about, and it has nothing to do with what they were talking about before, then you have to ask questions. Doesn't mean it's wrong. I go on tangents sometimes, but at least I get back to it, and I'll always happy to explain why I brought something up. And if somebody says, well, you seem to be talking about something else, I'll say, well, yeah, I went on a little bit of a tangent. That's not them. They wanted to know who the police department was in my town. They wanted to know where they were, and they wanted to know my relationship with them. I wasn't going to tell them that. It's not their business. Anywho, the government is letting this all through. The government at all levels, they're just letting these things happen. It doesn't matter if you're on the right or the left. They're just letting it happen. They could stop all these problems today by getting rid of 501c organizations. No more nonprofit status. Let people work and make their own money. No more welfare benefits. Make sure that any Social Security is for the elderly and disabled. So there's no more supplemental security income, aka SSI. And if the government stops all this funding, all this subsidizing of these programs, they can get rid of a lot of problems. But still to this day, they're not stopping it. Investigating them isn't going to do any good because the government supports criminals nowadays. Most of the people that the government goes after are law-abiding citizens. They don't go after criminals, because if they went after criminals, people like Nancy Pelosi and Adam Schiff and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Joy Reid, they would be in jail right now. But who are they going after? They're going after Kid Rock. Kid Rock is a law-abiding, loyal American citizen, regardless of how much he talks about Christianity. Because there is a freedom of religion clause, and it applies to Christians, Jews, atheists, agnostics, and Muslims, and Mormons, and people of all religion. But you have to be able to determine when people are actually practicing religion and when people are using it to try to disguise themselves as something else. People do that now. There are people that have the American flag and pretend that they're patriots when they're actually something else. And they want to destroy this country. If you're a real patriot, you want to protect this country. You want to save this country. You want all the illegal aliens out of here. There are people that confuse these illegal aliens with people in their family that came here a long time ago and came through the system correctly. But they're not the same people. I was talking with a guy who said, My family came here and worked hard, and they were immigrants. And I wanted to say to him that the people that are coming here now illegally are not the same people. They're not people that are coming here to work. They're coming here to kill people. And they do. And they get off. People say, oh, what is taking so long for the government to do this? Or what is taking so long for this person, this criminal to be prosecuted? Because they're not going to be prosecuted. When there's news of an investigation, that's just news. That's just legacy media telling you bogus lies. These people aren't going to go to jail. The only people that go to jail nowadays are law-abiding citizens. And you have to be extra careful. But criminals, they're careless. They can do what they want. So even if they get caught, they'll get let go. Because we have too many woke judges. We have too many woke law enforcement that are replacing the police that actually used to protect us. And we can't have that anymore. Now, a lot of people thought it was, at one point, it was 10%, 20% of the country that thinks like this. But in actual fact, it's a lot more. How much more? We don't know. But we're finding out the hard way. Because if people can get together and have a No King's Day and have 800 protests all over and waste their time doing stupid things and trying to say that the country is a bad country, well then, you know there's a lot more. Now, No King's Day is an example of how progressive liberals not only have not studied history, they don't know a lot about life, they don't know about responsibility, they don't understand capitalism. They haven't learned anything at all. They have the mind of children, a lot like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She's a socialist because she has the mind of a child. Well, a lot of these people in these No Kings protests, they have minds of children too. They don't know what they're doing. They don't know what they're getting themselves into. They don't know anything about socialism or communism. They're wasting their time. It's a real shame. Instead of going to work, go to work. Make something, do something productive. Make something of yourself out of life. So you don't have to live off of other people. So you don't have to waste your time fighting for things that you know nothing about. But they don't know what they're doing, and they don't know what they're getting themselves into. Later on, they're going to end up being like Greta Thunberg. Greta Thunberg, she's in her 20s or something. I'm not sure her age. She's changing what she's fighting for because she doesn't know what she's fighting for and she doesn't know she's changing. By the time she's 40 years old, 45 years old, 50 years old, who knows, she's going to look back and wonder what happened with her life and where her life went. And she's not going to have anything to feel good about, because she doesn't know very much. People who work have a lot to feel good about. That's the beauty of capitalism. So when somebody wants to play down capitalism, they don't know what they're talking about because they never actually tried it. They never actually went to work. They never actually learned anything. You don't have to go to an Ivy League university to learn something. Most people who go to Ivy League universities don't know very much at all. A lot of people don't realize that these universities, especially the Ivy League ones, are nothing more than very expensive job references. That's all they are. Plumbers, pipe fitters, electricians, bus drivers, truck drivers. All these wonderful trades. They didn't go to college. They went to trade school. Or they taught themselves. The best musicians out there, like Ted Nugent or Jimi Hendrix, they all taught themselves. Now, sometimes it's good to have a rhythm guitar teacher. Matter of fact, many times it is, because all you need to do in 2 years, you could learn to play guitar or play piano. If you want to be a master at it, if you want to be an Elton John at the piano, or a Billy Joel at the piano, or you want to be a Ted Nugent on guitar, or Joe Satriani on guitar, or like Johnny Winter, then you just have to practice your ass off. But these people just waste their lives away. And then when they get older, when they get to be in their 40s or 50s, they look back and they feel very, very sad. They inside criticize themselves. So whether the quiet part comes out loud or not, they regret that they did not do something productive with their lives. So I'm one of those people that feel very good that I really worked hard for a living and I made a lot of money. A lot of times, not even the money is the first thing we do it for. But now the classic bottom line has been regurgitated. So today you hear people say the bottom line is money. Well, not necessarily true. If the bottom line is only money, then you're not going to understand capitalism as much. Because it's equally important where the money comes from as it's where it's going. And if you earn it, it's more special. It means something. The classic bottom line was the exchange of goods and services for money, and that our currency should always have a standard to back it up, like the gold standard or silver standard. But that's not what these people do. So when they talk about if you're into socialism or communism, you run out of other people's money, that's true, because other people either are not going to have that money and led you on to believe something that wasn't true, or they were not really interested in your well-being. Well, nobody cares more about you than you. So you should really try to put as much into your soul and your knowledge and your well-being as possible. You should learn about your health. You should do all these things, but people don't do it now. AI was composed by man. They say it's going to take over man, and the only way it's going to take over man is if it can maintain itself, and it doesn't need man to maintain it. Well, there's a lot of high-tech operators there that are creating this, but it's not the same. A lot of these socialists that are trying to gain support for their socialist cause or their communist cause and are very rich right now have this crazy idea that they're going to be at the better end of this. But if and when the U.S. loses its constitutional republic status and is no longer a constitutional republic, which by 2100 may be possible, all of these rich socialists, all these people that think they're such great progressive liberals, are going to be paupers themselves and are going to live very, very unpleasantly, because then themselves, they're going to be servants and slaves to very, very powerful people who know what socialism and communism is. No King's Day is a perfect example of that. No King's Day, people were saying on there, somebody's got to tell this person that they're wrong about Trump. Or somebody's got to tell this person that Hawaii is a part of the country. Oh, I'm going to leave the country and go to Hawaii. No, don't tell these people that they're being so stupid. Don't tell don't give them ideas. Don't help them out. Let them make fools of themselves. When they make public fools of themselves, they start to lose support. And as they lose support, they start to find that nobody is interested in anything they're doing. Now, I always continue with content, but I always ask people to like, share, and subscribe to the City Rooster Forum wherever you get your podcast. I always put out a new video every week, depending on health and other business circumstances.